Ladies and gentlemen, I shall begin by giving you an assignment which I'd like you to do at the end of this evening's lecture when you go home. I'll make a statement to you and ask you to write it down. Later, when you're at home and sitting relaxed in a chair, I want you to think about it very carefully for approximately 2 to 3 minutes. You'll not be asked to report on the results of the experiment. It's done only for yourselves. I'll make a statement to you which you're to assume is addressed to each of you personally and individually. The statement is, you are not always honest. After you've thought about this statement later tonight, please immediately write down in as much detail as you can remember exactly what went on in your minds, but not as you would explain it or interpret it to someone else, as though you were literally photographing your own mental processes. Don't explain what you did, only record it. If you thought partly in images, don't substitute the conceptual meaning of those images for the images. Record the images. If some of your sentences weren't completed, don't complete them. If there were moments of mental blankness or moments when your mind wandered to something else, record that. If your thinking was interspersed with irrelevancies or with emotions or with memories, write them down. Leave nothing out. Please keep these records so that as the course progresses, you can compare your own mental processes with those that we'll be discussing. And do one further thing. Before the next lecture, read over your notes and consider the nature of the mental processes in which you were engaged. Try to evaluate it yourself. Ask yourself if you consider what your mind did to be fully adequate to deal with the statement I made. See if you can find any flaws in your mental process, or if you can identify whatever you consider to be valid about it. And ask yourself if it is characteristic, if whatever errors in approach you might find are errors that you commonly make, or only occasionally make, if the virtues you find are consistently practiced or not. Throughout the course, remember this assignment and compare your methods with those that we'll be discussing. Now, this assignment is, of course, very limited in scope. It can, at best, because of the relatively simple and necessarily somewhat arbitrary nature of the problem I gave you, reveal only a few principles of thinking, both correct and incorrect. But you may find that in many cases it has revealed crucial principles. The purpose, value, and justification of any science or any intellectual endeavor is ultimately the contribution it makes to man's life, to his ability to deal effectively with reality, achieve his goals, support and enhance his existence. In introducing you to a course of lectures on some of the principles of efficient thinking, I want first then to consider the facts of reality and of man's nature that necessitate such a discipline or study. Why do we need such a study? Who cares? What is its justification? We know that man's mind, his rational faculty, is his basic means of survival. Man's life depends upon his ability to think. The two fundamental facts about man's mind that give rise to and necessitate a science of thinking are that A, man's proper mode of awareness is conceptual, and B, that the use of the conceptual faculty is volitional. The conceptual faculty is like an automobile, of which man has to be the driver. How does man's mind operate? I won't recapitulate in detail the discussion of sensations, perceptions, and conceptions given in Nathaniel Branden's course, Basic Principles of Objectivism. But I will remind you of the essence of that discussion, particularly in regard to the nature of concept formation. The material of thought and the ultimate source of all human knowledge is the evidence of reality provided by the senses. A sensation is the state of awareness produced by a physical stimulus transmitted from sensory receptors along nerve cells to the brain. It is the state of awareness which results, for instance, when light waves strike the retina of the eye, or sound waves strike the membranes of the ear. It is sensations that constitute the mind's first contact with reality. A sensation is the primary unit out of which all subsequent knowledge is built. But a sensation is not yet knowledge. It's only the material of future knowledge. The first knowledge of reality begins with perceptions, with the integration of disparate sensory stimuli into solid, specific things, into objects, into entities. A perception is an identified sensation or group of sensations. Thus, sounds, colors, odors are sensed. Objects and attributes, when recognized as such, are perceived. Man's knowledge begins when, at the start of his life, out of the complex haze of sensory stimuli impinging upon him, he is able to isolate specific sensations and integrate them into the perception of solid entities, into trees, rocks, chairs, people. This first act of integration in the human consciousness, the integration of sensations into perceptions, is done automatically by our sense organs, our nerves, and our brain. We can observe that a similar automatic integration is performed by the brains of the higher animals, and that they too are aware of reality by means of perceptions. But the next step of awareness is not an automatic process. It is the step that leads to the level of awareness proper to the consciousness of man, the level of awareness achieved by the process of abstraction. An abstraction is the identification of that which is in common among two or more particulars. To form an abstraction is to move from the perception of a red carpet, a red apple, and a red vase to the concept red. To move from the perception of a coffee table, a living room table, and a kitchen table to the concept table. Man climbs still higher in his conceptual understanding of the world when he recognizes not only what objects have in common, but also what abstractions have in common. When, from the concepts furniture, clothing, and dishes, he arrives at manufactured utilitarian objects. When, from the concepts of literature, painting, and sculpture, he arrives at art. A brief summary of the process of concept formation is given by Ayn Rand in her article, The Objectivist Ethics, and I quote, "A sensation is produced by the automatic reaction of a sense organ to a stimulus from the outside world. It lasts for the duration of the immediate moment, as long as the stimulus lasts, and no longer. Sensations are an automatic response.